Few seconds.
Sutta explained that since the sages, gods, universal leaders, and the great progenitors who populate the universe are all empowered by the Lord's divine potency, they are also considered avatars. Shaluka said, I thought Krishna was supreme. Why do you say that he, like the other avatars, comes from the Purusha avatar? Uh, Sutta held up his hands. Acha, avatar, Garvadakshay Vishnu. Sutta held up his hands. Do not misunderstand. Although I included Krishna in this list of incarnations, you should know that he is their source. All divinities are either his direct or subsidiary parts. Krishna is the original supreme personality of Godhead. Everything comes from him, including Vishnu. Therefore, to serve Krishna with love is life's ultimate goal. Sutta stressed that only when our loving service attitude Parikit. However, because huh, towards Krishna is awakened, can we get full and permanent relief from misery? To achieve this, we must carefully hear and discuss the mysteries of his appearances with faith every morning and evening. Shaluka raised a doubt. Dear Shuta, why did you not include in your list of incarnations the cosmic arrangement of the planets known as the Virat Rupa? Many sages meditate on this as the Lord's universal form. Shuta replied, the Virat Rupa is an imaginary conception made to help neophyte worshippers who cannot accept God's spiritual form and personality. Since they can only think in material terms, they believe that if God has a form, it limits him. By meditating on the Virat Rupa, gradually they adjust to the idea that God is a person. Shukadeva, who also described this meditation to Parikshit. However, because the cosmos is not Krishna's true form, I have not included the Virat Rupa in the list of incarnations. Revered Shuta, this is confusing. If the universe is not the Lord, then how can such meditation have any value? The other sages in the assembly nodded their heads in appreciation of the question. After a moment's thought, Shuta replied, consider this example. Although both the air and sky are invisible, we refer to the air as dusty or the sky as cloudy. The dust and clouds help us to perceive the existence of the air and sky. Similarly, by seeing the planetary systems as Krishna's personal form, the spiritual novice begins to appreciate that the Lord is a person. However, the actual all pervasive spiritual form of the Lord, however, okay, is invisible. It is also external and indestructible. Unlike the planetary systems, knowing that some yogis meditate on a subtle form of the universe which is unseen, unheard, and unmanifest. Shanuka mentioned this and asked, is this a spiritual form of God? Sutta replied, no, this is also material. Shanuka looked thoughtful. Since it can be neither seen nor heard, then is it also imaginary? No, the subtle form exists. It is the cause of the gross physical form. How can this form be understood? It is like the subtle body of the living being, which carries him from one physical body to another. Just as the living being has his gross and subtle bodies, so does the universe. And as the living being is the soul.
You want somebody else to read? You seem to be coughing as well. Vilas
Yeah,
Manjari, would you like to read?
yeah. Thank you, Mataji. Thank you so much.
I wanted to ask actually. Yeah, Rajeshri, I will take. Yeah. Since both these meditations are material, please explain how one can conceive of spirit. By the proper culture of transcendental knowledge, one gradually becomes indifferent to the needs of both the subtle and gross material bodies. Only then are we eligible to see both our own eternal spiritual nature as well as the Lord's. Shaunaka looked troubled. How is it possible to become detached from the demands of the mind and senses? Especially in Kali Yuga, people will find it very difficult. This is only possible by Krishna's grace, replied Sutta. When he sees the soul sincerely trying to reach him and praying for release from ignorance, the Lord lifts the curtain of Maya, illusion, and reveals himself in his all-pervasive spiritual nature. From this position of Brahman realization, the repentant soul begins pure devotional service, shining in his own spiritual glory. 3.35. So, are you saying that we should stop meditating on the gross and subtle forms of the material universe? Asked Shaunaka. Sutta nodded. Those who are wise reject both these forms and instead worship the unborn Lord, who has no material form or activities and who resides in the heart as the supersoul. This is the highest knowledge given in the Vedas. Shaunaka looked around the assembled sages. It seemed from their calm expressions that they accepted Sutta's instruction. Perhaps he should address doubts about the difference between the living beings and the Supreme Soul. These were surely widespread. Shaunaka asked, if the soul is constitutionally spiritual like the Lord, how is it that, unlike him, our birth and activities are material? Krishna is the abode of all wealth, power, beauty, fame, wisdom, and detachment, replied Sutta. He is therefore not influenced by lust, greed, envy, or any other material quality. His only reason for coming to the material world is to benefit the fallen souls, whom he accompanies within their hearts. He creates, maintains, and destroys the cosmos without being at all affected by material consciousness. Shaunaka drew his brows together, eyebrows. It certainly seemed that Krishna was bewildered by sense objects like an ordinary man. He said, how can we accept that Krishna is not affected by lust? Did he not have many gopis, girlfriends, whilst a youth, and later married thousands of beautiful queens? Krishna cannot be known by observation or mental speculation. No, not at all. That's Sutta. No one can understand the Lord's pastimes, names, and forms with the material mind, nor explain them by their words, since Krishna is beyond the purview of both. Then how can the Lord be known? Only by rendering unreserved, uninterpreted, favorable service to Krishna can one know him in his glory, power, and transcendence. Shaunaka's head fell. The only way to render such continuous service to Krishna was out of pure love. He said, how lamentable is my situation, for I have no love for Krishna. How can I ever know him? The other sages present voiced agreement. How can we ever attain such love? Said one. How can I attain such love? Sutta said, O Lord, O learned ones, you are all most fortunate. Inquiring about Krishna and trying to understand the answers is the means of invoking our love for God. Krishna, the proprietor of the universe, guarantees immunity from the dreadful repetition of birth and death to those who seriously make such inquiries. Many in the audience cheered, and Shaunaka said, "Please tell us what we need to hear and understand." Sutta replied, "I shall recite to you the beautiful Srimad Bhagavatam, the literary incarnation of God, containing histories of great devotees in direct contact with the Lord. Vasudeva extracted the cream of the Vedas to compile this unique literature for the benefit of all. Then he taught it to his own son Shukadeva. He, in turn, delivered these teachings to King Parikshit as he sat surrounded by sages of Naimisharanya on the bank of the Ganges, where he had retired to fast until death." 1 minute. Recalling the sixth of the sages' original questions, Sutta said, "Srimad Bhagavatam is brilliant like the sun. It appeared just after Krishna returned to his own abode, accompanied by religion and knowledge. People in Kali Yuga who are suffering due to ignorance can get guidance from this great literature." Sutta bowed his head. "As you know, I had the extraordinary opportunity to hear Shukadeva instruct King Parikshit. Since I listened to that conversation with rapt attention, Shukadeva bestowed his mercy on me. Thus I was able to understand the Bhagavatam. I shall try to help you comprehend it in the same way, exactly as I understood it from him." 4. Vasudeva's confusion. Sutta narrates the events preceding Vasudeva writing the Srimad Bhagavatam. In trance, Vasudeva sees a vision of the calamities that will occur in Kali Yuga. Intent on helping the people of that age, he compiles the Vedas and Mahabharata, but still feels dissatisfied. At that time, his spiritual master Narada arrives. A murmur of excitement ran through the audience. The sages were eager to learn more about the Srimad Bhagavatam. As they settled down, Shaunaka said, "O Sutta, please tell us in which yuga, in what place, and for what reason Sage Vasudeva undertook this great work? What inspired him to write the Srimad Bhagavatam?" Sutta replied, "As I am sure you know, Vasudeva was born as the son of Parasara Muni and Satyavati at the end of Dwapara Yuga. Immediately after his birth, he grew to maturity and left for the Himalayas to practice austerity." Sutta began to relate the story. Toward the end of the night, Vasudeva, clad in only a lion cloth, walked by the moonlight to the river Saraswati. He waded up to his waist into the cool waters. Blocking his nose, ears, and eyes with his fingers, he plunged in and out of the water 3 times. The air was still. There was nobody else in sight. Birds could be heard chirping as the rising sun tinged the eastern horizon with its orange rays. Vasudeva stood in the river, chanting the Gayatri mantra. A few deer approached the bank and lapped at the water, but Vasudeva paid no heed. Finishing the Gayatri, he began to pray, "My Lord, how may I serve you? No one should live simply for his own gratification. Please guide me how I can best please you." For many hours, he beseeched the Lord, entering a deep trance of meditation. In his mind's eye, he saw prophetic visions of Kali Yuga's coming degradation. The afflicted people would age quickly and die young of disease or violence. Driven by greed, lust, and anger, they would destroy the earth and engage in the mass slaughter of animals and each other. Horrified by these revelations, Vasudeva opened his eyes with a start. His heart pounded and sweat ran down his brow. He had to find a way to save the people from their ignorance. For some days he contemplated what to do. Although the Vedas guided people how to piously fulfill their material desires and attain salvation at the end of life, he knew this would be ineffective in the age of Kali. The scriptures were vast, complicated, and not even written down. One had to hear and memorize them. That would be impossible in this age when men's memories would be so poor they would forget what they did the previous day. Vasudeva sighed. Bereft of Vedic knowledge, it was no wonder people in Kali Yuga would act abominably, suffering in this life and going to hell after death. The sage decided to both document the Vedas and organize them into 4 divisions, named Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva. After this, he added a 5th section called the Puranas, historical narrations illustrating the truths taught in the other 4 Vedas. He labored for some years, compiling, organizing, writing, and storing the entire Vedic canon. Still, he was dissatisfied. Even though they were now recorded, it would still be difficult for any common man to understand them. He therefore entrusted each section to one of his senior disciples to teach. Paila Rishi was given the Rigveda, Jaimini the Samaveda, Vaishampayana the Yajur Veda, Anchira Muni the Atharva Veda, and Romaharshana the Puranas. After training these 5 students in their respective works, he commanded them, go among the people and show them how to understand and apply these teachings. Train your students. Next page. Just as I have trained you. Through such spiritual and moral education, hopefully we can save those who will take our help from the ravages of Kali Yuga. After his 5 disciples had departed, Vasudeva retired to his ashram. He sat in silence, chanting the Lord's names in his mind. For some reason, his heart was not peaceful. Although he had now fully presented the Vedas to enable people to achieve life's ultimate goal, he still felt dissatisfied. Only the most intelligent persons would understand even his simplified versions of the Vedas. How could he help ordinary people see the path of true happiness? For some days, he agonized over this problem until at last he became inspired to write the Mahabharata, a drama filled with intrigue and romance. This would attract the minds of those unable to study the Vedas. He would weave salient moral truths into the work which would enable people to become happy in this life and attain salvation at the end. Day and night Vasudeva wrote, barely eating or sleeping. Despite his tireless efforts, when the Mahabharata was finished, he still felt anxious. Confused, he sat in thought for many days. If he was not satisfied after composing these works, how would anyone achieve satisfaction by reading them? What was his mistake? Maybe it was because he had only taught how to become materially happy and attain liberation. He had not explained how to achieve true spiritual satisfaction. This was only possible when one renders loving service to Krishna. As Vasudeva sat outside his cottage on the banks of the Saraswati, regretting his failings, he heard an angelic voice singing, Radhika Ramana. Looking up, he saw the celestial sage, Narada, descending from the airways. Clad in black deerskin and playing his golden lute as he sang, he seemed like a second sun, his golden hair framing his face in a radiant halo. Gurudeva, Vasudeva called out in exultation. Jumping up, he ran to greet his spiritual master. After an affectionate exchange, Vasudeva formally welcomed Narada by washing his feet, garlanding him with forest flowers, and offering him refreshment. Then, kneeling before him with folded palms, Vasudeva said, Master, I am blessed by your presence.
Jai. We can pause at this point, and tomorrow we will read 5th chapter. But this story is very relevant for us because we sometimes get confused in our life, in our duties, and then we are feeling really down. Imagine if Vyasadeva, who is the literary incarnation of Krishna, was actually feeling this way. Who are we to think that we should always have clarity or fulfillment or satisfaction? So maybe we can exchange a few words on this, and then we can end the reading with a shloka. Anybody has any thoughts, questions? And also I was thinking how yesterday was so organized, like it was speaking, I mean, like I was thinking of personality types, and he was such a J, like super organized, basically. So sometimes being super organized doesn't necessarily bring pleasure to Krishna. It's more about our organization, but Krishna's organization is different. I was just thinking that.
I was thinking, since soul's function is to render service to Krishna, unless that function of the soul is addressed, of rendering service to Krishna, will remain dissatisfied. There is no complete satisfaction.
True. Absolutely. Same thing in our lives, right? We may be doing all things right, perfectly, but we may still feel anxious, and it's because Krishna is not pleased. That's why we say, God's will and not mine be done. Because in my will, there is no fulfillment. Any other questions about the context of this chapter or this story?
While reading, I saw that Vasudeva wrote Vedas and Upanishads addressing how one can attain moksha through dharma, artha, kama. So was that the path of self-realization in those ages?
What was the path?
Like dharma, artha, kama, moksha, leading people to salvation?
Yeah.
Not real. Bhakti was also there. I didn't understand, like.
Yeah, I mean,
He didn't directly
the Vedas, yes, they were limited to dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Of course, moksha meant that you to take shelter of the Supreme Lord and surrender. But that's why we had so many of our acharyas come, right? Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, they came to establish. And then, of course, Lord Chaitanya came. And he revolutionized the whole Vedic knowledge. So, and then, of course, when Prabhupada came, it became much, much more available, the knowledge. So that's why we need devotees to guide us. Otherwise, we cannot understand bhakti. How do you say? There's a shloka. We can only learn how to do bhakti from a person who has bhakti. We can't learn. Like Vyasdeva was saying, if I'm feeling dissatisfied writing this, how can other people feel satisfaction by reading it, right? Yeah. So bhakti can be transferred from heart to heart. And until Vyasadeva, as it said here, there was not even, where is that? Not even written down. The scriptures were very vast, complicated, and not even written down. No one had to hear and memorize them. one had to hear and memorize them. So there was like, okay, one guru knew, and then they'd sit their students down in the Gurukul and say it. And depending on the capacity of the students, they would remember it. And when they become teachers, they would teach it. You understand, there was no J plan for the Vedic knowledge to survive. And Vyasadeva was thinking of Kali Yuga and said, oh God, these people not remember anything. So he wanted to put together the, in writing. So yes, there was a system for Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, or studying of the Vedas, but it was not written down. It was all mouth to mouth. It was all person to person. Only Brahmanas would receive it. Right? This point, at this point, what's happening here with Vyasadeva is a huge transformation. You see, the Lord is already working on creating resources so that this knowledge remains. And otherwise, a lot of people could misuse it. And if we don't have qualified Brahmanas teaching, this knowledge would not even exist. And this is why it's still important for us. Even imagine, look at what Vyasadeva has compiled, right? It's so difficult to understand it. Without Guru, without Prabhupada, we would never understand it. But imagine that didn't even exist, right? It would have been like such a chaos, because a lot of false gurus are around, even with these scriptures, even with these authorized scriptures being given to us. There's so many false gurus, bogus sampradayas, apasampradayas. So, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, all the three have to be combined together. Then we are getting something substantial. Otherwise, simply feeling sentiments is not going to help us to reach God. That's why we need to have a teacher who guides us. We need to have the proper scriptures, and we need the association of those who are also in the same path. Yeah. Any other point, questions? Or we can. I'll just open the shloka. Just give me a second. We'll read the shloka and end today's. Kanteya Prabhu covered the first verse, so today we will cover the second verse. The third, this is the second one. Okay, let me share the screen. This is one of my favorite shlokas. Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu shivadam tapatrayon mulanam Shrimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kimva Parairishwaraha Sadyo Hridyavarudyate Trakritibi Sushrusubhi Tatkshanat. Somebody likes to read the translation? Please go ahead.
Shall I read, Mataji? Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vasdeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Shall I go with the purport also?
No, thank you very much.
Okay,
Jai
thank you.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki,
Jai,
Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Jai,
Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki, Jai.
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 Beautiful. This has been beautiful studying